The cold had stopped hurting an hour ago. Seren lay curled in the snow, her thin dress soaked through, her bare feet numb and blue. Somewhere above her, the storm howled through the ancient pines, dumping fresh powder on her trembling body. She had stopped, shivering. She knew what that meant. The healers in her old pack had called it the final mercy, when the body surrendered to the frost and let the mind drift away into peaceful darkness. She welcomed it. After everything she had endured, peace sounded like a gift. The memories came in fragments, sharp as broken glass. Her mother's death when she was 7, leaving her alone with a father who saw her as nothing more than a burden. His remarriage to a woman with 2 daughters of her own, beautiful and cruel and endlessly jealous of the girl who reminded everyone of the first wife's beauty. Years of being worked like a servant in her own home, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, going without food while her stepsisters feasted, sleeping in the cellar while they complained about the softness of their feather beds. And then, 3 days ago, the final blow. Her father had sold her like livestock to a wolf 3 times her age, a minor lord with a reputation for cruelty and a taste for breaking young brides. The wedding was to be tomorrow. But Seren had fled in the night, running into the winter storm with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate, terrible hope. If she couldn't live free, she would at least die free. Now, lying in the snow, watching the white flakes drift down through her fading vision, she felt something close to peace. No more pain, no more fear, no more waking each day to cruelty and contempt. Just silence and cold, and the slow release of a life that had never wanted her anyway. Her eyes drifted closed, and then she heard it. The crunch of massive paws on snow. The low, rumbling growl of a wolf larger than any she had ever encountered. Heat washed over her frozen skin. Impossible, unnatural heat, radiating from something enormous and alive. Seren forced her eyes open. A wolf stood over her. No, not a wolf. A monster. It was the size of a small horse, its fur black as midnight, its eyes blazing gold in the storm's gray light. Power rolled off it in waves, pressing against her senses like a physical weight. Her own wolf, dormant and weak from years of malnourishment, stirred feebly in recognition. Alpha. The word echoed through her fading consciousness. Not just any alpha, an alpha king. The great wolf lowered its head and sniffed her, its breath hot against her frozen cheek. A sound rumbled in its chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. Something that sounded almost like distress. Then the world blurred, and the wolf was gone. In its place stood a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair dusted with snow and a face that looked carved from granite. Sharp cheekbones. A strong jaw shadowed with stubble. And those eyes, those blazing golden eyes, fixed on her with an intensity that cut through the fog of hypothermia. "Who did this to you?" His voice was low and rough, barely contained fury simmering beneath the words. Seren tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't move. Her body had given up. She was going to die here, staring into the eyes of a king, and she couldn't even tell him that she had done this to herself, that she had wanted it. The man cursed, a vicious sound that seemed to make the storm itself flinch. Then he was lifting her, cradling her against a chest that burned like a furnace, wrapping his cloak around her frozen body. She should have fought, should have begged him to let her go, to let her end. But the heat was seeping into her bones, and her wolf was pressing toward him with desperate, inexplicable yearning, and she found she couldn't resist. "Stay with me." The command was sharp, brooking no argument. "I did not find you just to watch you die. Stay with me." Serene's eyes fluttered. Through the haze, she saw concern etched on that harsh face. Concern for her, a stranger, a nobody, a girl so worthless her own father had sold her. "Why?" she managed, the word barely a whisper. The Alpha King looked down at her and something shifted in his golden gaze, something that looked almost like recognition. "Because my wolf won't let me leave you," he said quietly, "and neither will I." Then he was running, carrying her through the storm like she weighed nothing at all, and Seren let the darkness take her at last. But this time, the darkness felt less like death and more like the beginning of something new. Serene woke to warmth. For a long moment, she simply lay there, confused by the sensation. She couldn't remember the last time she had been truly warm. The cellar where she slept was always damp and cold. The thin blanket her stepmother allowed her never enough to keep out the chill. But now she was wrapped in softness, surrounded by heat, her body heavy and comfortable in a way that felt almost foreign. She opened her eyes. The room was enormous. Vaulted ceilings stretched overhead, dark wooden beams crossing ancient stone. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries depicting wolves and moons and winter forests. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she had ever felt, the furs piled atop her thick and luxurious. She was wearing a clean linen shift that was not her own, and her hair had been washed and braided. Someone had taken care of her. Someone had saved her life. The realization crashed over her, and with it came a wave of grief, so intense she couldn't breathe. She had wanted to die, had made peace with it. And now she was alive, and she would have to keep living. And the thought of facing another day of existence made her want to scream. "You're awake!" The voice came from the shadows by the window. Seren jerked upright, her heart hammering, and found herself staring at the man from the storm. He stood with his arms crossed, watching her with those unsettling golden eyes. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly now, the sharp planes of his face, the power coiled in his broad shoulders, the silver circlet resting on his dark hair that marked him as royalty. "Who are you?" Her voice came out rough, scratchy from disuse. "Where am I?" "My name is Cale Ashford. I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." He pushed off from the wall and walked toward her, his movements fluid and predatory. "You're in my fortress, Thornwood Keep. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days. She had lost 3 days, which meant the wedding she had fled from was long past, which meant Lord Vance would be looking for her, which meant, "The man who was supposed to marry you is dead." Serene's thoughts stuttered to a halt. What? Lord Vance. Kyle's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "When I discovered who had purchased you like cattle, I paid him a visit. He will not be bothering you or any other young woman again." She stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. A king had killed a lord for her. An Alpha King had avenged a nobody girl he had found half dead in the snow. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Kyle stopped at the edge of her bed, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Up close, his eyes were even more striking, gold shot through with amber, burning with an intensity that made her wolf stir restlessly in her chest. "I told you in the storm," he said quietly. "My wolf won't let me leave you. He recognized something in you the moment we found you." He paused, and for just a moment, vulnerability cracked through his stern facade. "I haven't felt my wolf respond to anyone in 5 years, and then there you were, dying in the snow, and he went mad trying to save you." Seren's breath caught. She knew what he was implying. The mate bond. The ancient connection that linked wolf souls across time and distance. But that couldn't be right. She was nothing. Worse than nothing. She was broken and damaged and so worthless that her own father had sold her. "There must be a mistake," she said, shaking her head. "I'm not anyone important. I'm just—" "You are not just anything." His voice sharpened, and she flinched instinctively. He noticed, and something like pain crossed his features. I'm not going to hurt you. I would never hurt you. But I need you to understand that you matter, Serene. Whatever happened to you before, whatever lies they told you about your worth, they were wrong. She felt tears burning in her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had learned long ago not to cry. Tears were weakness, and weakness was punished. How do you know my name? She asked instead, deflecting from the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. You spoke it in your fever dreams. His expression softened slightly. Along with other things, your stepmother, your stepsisters, the cellar where they made you sleep. His hands curled into fists at his sides. I know what they did to you, and I swear to you, they will answer for it. Serene didn't know what to say. She had spent her entire life invisible, insignificant, enduring cruelty because she had no other choice. And now this king stood before her, promising vengeance, promising protection, looking at her like she was something precious instead of something discarded. What do you want from me? She asked. Kyle held her gaze, and the intensity in his golden eyes made her shiver. I want you to stay, he said simply. I want the chance to know you, to prove to you that the world is not as cruel as the wolves who raised you. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with something that sounded almost like longing. I want you to live, Seren, not just survive. Truly live. Will you let me help you do that? She should say no, should demand he return her to the wilderness, let her finish what she had started. But her wolf was pressing toward him, whimpering with a need she didn't understand. And somewhere beneath the layers of grief and trauma, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. Yes, she whispered, before she could stop herself. I'll stay. And the Alpha King smiled. Learning to live proved harder than Seren had imagined. For the first week, she barely left her chambers. The fortress was too big, too full of strangers who stared at her with undisguised curiosity. Servants whispered when she passed. Guards watched her with expressions she couldn't read. Everyone seemed to know that the Alpha King had carried a half-dead girl out of the storm, and everyone seemed to have an opinion about what that meant. Kyle visited her each evening. He would sit by the fire and talk to her about nothing in particular. The history of Thornwood Keep, the territories under his rule, the wolves who served him. He never pushed her to speak, never demanded anything in return. He simply stayed, filling the silence with his low, steady voice until the shadows in her mind retreated enough for her to breathe. It was on the 8th day that she finally ventured beyond her door. The fortress was ancient and sprawling, its corridors twisting through stone that had stood for centuries. Seren walked slowly, trailing her fingers along the cold walls, trying to memorize the path back to safety. She had just found her way to a small courtyard when a voice stopped her cold. So this is the stray the king dragged in from the snow. Seren turned. A woman stood in the archway, beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp and polished and dangerous. She had hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes like chips of green ice. Her gown was cut to display every curve, and the jewels at her throat probably cost more than Seren's father's entire household. I'm Lady Isolde, the woman continued, gliding closer with predatory grace. The king's cousin, and you must be the little charity case everyone's been whispering about. Seren's instincts screamed at her to bow, to apologize, to make herself small and invisible the way she had learned to do at home. But something held her back, a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. My name is Seren, she said quietly. I know what your name is. Lady Isolde circled her slowly, eyes raking over her borrowed dress, her too thin frame, her scarred hands. What I don't know is what you think you're doing here. The king has entertained many diversions over the years, but he's never brought one home before. It's caused quite a stir. I'm not a diversion. Aren't you? Isolde's smile was sharp enough to cut. Then what are you? A future queen? A mate? She laughed, cold and mocking. Look at yourself. You're a half-starved waif with no family, no status, and no future. Whatever interest Kale has in you will fade soon enough. And when it does, you'll find yourself back in the snow where you belong. The words struck deep, finding every wound Seren had tried to hide. Because Isolde was right, wasn't she? She was nothing. She had always been nothing. Kyle would realize his mistake eventually, and then. Cousin? The voice came from behind them, cold and sharp as a winter wind. Seren turned to find Kyle standing in the archway, his golden eyes fixed on Isolde with an expression that made the air itself grow heavy. Your Majesty. Isolde dropped into a curtsy, but her smirk remained. I was just welcoming your guests to Thornwood Keep. Is that what you call it? Kale crossed the courtyard in 3 strides and positioned himself at Serene's side. The warmth of his presence steadied her, though she hated how much she needed it. Because it sounded more like cruelty to me. I meant no offense. You meant nothing but offense. His voice dropped to a growl that made Serene's wolf shiver. Serene is not a guest. She is not a diversion. She is under my protection, and anyone who insults her insults me. Is that understood? Something flickered in Isolde's green eyes. Fear, quickly hidden beneath another false smile. Perfectly, Your Majesty. I apologize if my words caused any distress. She swept away without waiting for a response, her silk skirts rustling against the stone. Serene watched her go, her heart pounding, her hands trembling at her sides. I'm sorry, she said automatically. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't. Kyle turned to face her, and the fury in his expression softened into something gentler. Isolde has always been ambitious. She hoped I would choose her as my queen, and she resents anyone who threatens that dream. But I'm not threatening anything. I'm nobody. You keep saying that. He reached out and took her hands in his grip warm and steady. And every time you do, I want to find every wolf who made you believe it and tear them apart. Seren stared down at their joined hands, his thumbs traced gentle circles on her wrists, soothing the frantic beat of her pulse. No one had ever touched her so carefully. No one had ever looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she mattered. I don't know how to be someone who matters, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Then let me teach you. He lifted her hands and pressed a kiss to her scarred knuckles, so gentle it made her heart ache. One day at a time. One moment at a time. Will you let me try? She should say no, should protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. But his eyes held nothing but sincerity, and her wolf was purring with contentment, and for the first time in her life, Seren wanted to believe. Yes, she breathed. I'll try. And something in Kale's expression shifted, a crack in the armor of the Alpha King, revealing the lonely man beneath. 2 weeks passed, and Seren began to heal. It happened in small ways at first. She started eating full meals instead of picking at her food like a frightened bird. She began sleeping through the night without waking in a cold sweat, gasping from nightmares of cellars and cold hands and her stepmother's cruel laughter. She found herself walking the fortress corridors with her head held higher, meeting the curious stares of servants and guards with something approaching steadiness. And through it all, there was Kyle. He made time for her every day, despite the endless demands of ruling a kingdom. Morning walks through the snow-covered gardens. Afternoon lessons in the library, where he taught her to read the ancient texts she had never been allowed to learn. Evening meals shared by the fire in his private chambers, talking about everything and nothing until the candles burned low. It was during one of those evenings that she finally asked the question that had been burning inside her. You said your wolf went silent for 5 years, she said, watching the flames dance in the hearth. What happened? Kyle went still beside her. For a long moment he didn't speak, and Seren wondered if she had pushed too far. Then he set down his wine goblet and stared into the fire with eyes that had gone distant and dark. Her name was Elara, he said quietly. She was my betrothed. The match was arranged when we were children, and by the time we came of age, I had convinced myself I loved her. A bitter smile twisted his lips. I was young and foolish and desperate to believe in something good. Serene's chest tightened. What happened to her? She betrayed me. The words came out flat and hard. She was working with my enemies, a faction of lords who wanted to overthrow my family and claim the throne for themselves. For 2 years she shared my bed and whispered my secrets to wolves who wanted me dead. Horror washed over Seren. She thought of her own betrayals, her father's cold eyes as he sold her stepmother's gleeful cruelty, and felt a kinship with Kale's pain that cut her to the bone. I discovered the truth the night before our wedding, he continued. I found letters in her chambers, detailing every weakness in my defenses, every vulnerability in my guard rotations. She had been planning to have me assassinated during the ceremony. What did you do? What any alpha would do. His golden eyes met hers, and she saw the ghosts of that terrible night lurking in their depths. I executed her, publicly, in front of the entire court. His hands curled into fists on his knees. My wolf went silent that same night. I think he blamed himself for not sensing her treachery, for not protecting us from the woman we thought we loved. Seren reached out before she could stop herself, her hand covering his clenched fist. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your wolf's fault either. She chose to deceive you. That was her failing, not yours. Kale looked down at her hand on his, and something shifted in his expression. The hardness melted away, leaving behind a vulnerability that made him look almost young. For 5 years, I felt nothing, he said softly. My wolf was there, but distant, like a stranger living inside my skin. I had given up on ever feeling whole again. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. And then I found you dying in the snow, and everything changed. Her breath caught. Kale, I'm not telling you this to pressure you. His voice was rough with emotion. I know you've been hurt. I know you need time. But I need you to understand what you mean to me, Seren. You woke something inside me that I thought was dead. You gave me back my wolf. You gave me back myself. Tears burned in her eyes, and this time she didn't fight them. They spilled down her cheeks, warm against her cold skin, and Kyle caught them with gentle fingers. I don't deserve that, she whispered. I don't deserve any of this. You deserve everything. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm on her lips. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if you'll let me. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to accept what he was offering when every instinct screamed that it would be taken away. But his eyes held hers with such earnest sincerity, and her wolf was keening with need, and somewhere deep in her chest, she felt the first tentative threads of the mate bond beginning to weave themselves together. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. His lips curved into a small, sad smile. But I would rather be scared with you than safe without you. She closed her eyes and let his warmth surround her. For the first time in her life, Seren allowed herself to imagine a future worth living for. And it looked like golden eyes and gentle hands and a king who had found her in the snow and refused to let her go. The first snow of deep winter fell on the night everything changed. Seren stood at her window, watching the flakes drift down from a sky heavy with clouds. A month had passed since Kale had found her dying in the forest. A month of healing, of learning, of slowly beginning to believe that she might be worth something after all. She still had dark days, moments when the old voices crept in and whispered that she was nothing, that this was all a dream that would shatter the moment she reached for it. But those moments were growing fewer, and the light between them was growing brighter. A knock at her door made her turn. She expected a servant, perhaps bringing the evening tea she had grown fond of. Instead, she opened the door to find Kale standing in the corridor, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, his golden eyes bright with something she couldn't name. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I want to show you." She followed him through winding corridors and up spiraling staircases until they emerged onto a tower balcony that overlooked the entire valley. The view stole her breath. Snow-covered mountains rose in the distance, their peaks glowing silver under the moonlight. The forest stretched out below like a sea of white-capped trees, and the sky above was so full of stars it seemed to pulse with light. "This was my mother's favorite place," Kale said quietly, moving to stand beside her at the railing. "She used to bring me here when I was a boy. She said the stars looked close enough to touch." Seren glanced at him. He rarely spoke of his family. She knew his parents had died when he was young, that he had been raised by advisors and tutors who cared more about shaping a king than nurturing a child. Another wound they shared. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It is." But he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at her. "Though I confess, the scenery is not the only reason I brought you here." Her heart stuttered. "Oh?" Kyle turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her breath catch. The mask of the Alpha King was gone entirely, leaving behind only the man, vulnerable and earnest, and looking at her like she held his entire world in her hands. "I have been patient," he said, his voice low and rough. "I have given you time, given you space, tried not to push for more than you were ready to give. But I find I cannot keep silent any longer." He reached out and took her hands in his grip warm despite the cold. "I love you, Seren." The words hit her like a wave, washing away every defense she had built. She stared at him, unable to speak, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I love your strength," he continued, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "I love how you survived things that would have broken anyone else. I love how you're learning to smile again, how you're learning to hope again. I love every scar and every shadow and every part of you that you think is damaged." His voice cracked slightly. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever found, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, if you'll let me." Tears blurred her vision. For so long she had believed herself unlovable, a burden, a mistake. And now this man, this king who could have anyone, stood before her in the falling snow and offered her everything she had never dared to dream of. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be loved. I don't know how to love someone without being afraid they'll leave." "Then we'll learn together." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him cutting through the winter chill. "I am just as broken as you are, Seren. Just as scared. But my wolf chose you, and my heart chose you, and if you'll have me—" She kissed him. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it. One moment she was drowning in his words, and the next her hands were fisting in his cloak and her lips were pressed to his. He went still for a heartbeat, surprise freezing him in place. Then he groaned low in his throat and kissed her back with a ferocity that stole her breath. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her against him until her feet left the snow-dusted stone. She gasped into his mouth, and he swallowed the sound, his tongue sweeping against hers in a claiming that left no room for doubt. He tasted like winter and wanting, and when his teeth grazed her lower lip, she felt the mate bond blaze to life between them, golden and fierce and utterly undeniable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. His golden eyes were blazing, his wolf pressing close to the surface, but his touch remained impossibly gentle. "I love you too," Seren breathed. "I think I have since you carried me out of the snow. I was just too afraid to admit it." His answering smile lit up the darkness like a sunrise. "Then stop being afraid," he murmured, "and let me love you the way you deserve." She pulled him down for another kiss, and the stars wheeled overhead, and for the first time in her life, Seren felt truly, completely alive. The happiness lasted 2 perfect weeks, 2 weeks of stolen kisses in shadowed corridors, of waking to find flowers on her pillow and love notes tucked into her books, of Kale's hand finding hers beneath the table during council meetings, his thumb tracing lazy patterns on her palm while advisors droned about border disputes and trade agreements. Seren had never known such joy existed. She hadn't known that life could feel like this, bright and warm and full of possibility. But happiness, she should have remembered, never lasted for girls like her. The delegation arrived on a gray afternoon, their carriages rolling through the fortress gates, with banners she recognized all too well, her father's crest, the house where she had been born, where she had suffered, where she had been sold like a piece of furniture. Seren watched from her window as they emerged, her father, gray-haired and stooped, his face set in familiar lines of cold disapproval. Her stepmother, Venna, dressed in silks that Seren's labor had paid for, her smile sharp as a blade, and her stepsisters, Mira and Corin, beautiful and cruel, already whispering to each other as they surveyed the fortress with greedy eyes. Her blood turned to ice. She found Kale in the throne room, his expression dark as he listened to his steward explain the visitor's arrival. When he saw her in the doorway, his face softened with concern. "You've heard," he said. "I saw them from my window." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Why are they here?" "They claim you were kidnapped." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "They've come to demand your return." The word hit her like a blow. Return. To the cellar. To the cruelty. To a life that had nearly driven her to die in the snow. She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, felt the old panic rising in her chest. "I won't go back." The words came out as a whisper. "Kale, I can't. I won't survive it again." He was across the room in an instant, his hands cupping her face, his golden eyes fierce with promise. "You are not going anywhere. Do you understand me? I don't care what they claim. I don't care what lies they've brought. You are mine, and I will burn the entire kingdom before I let them take you." She clung to him, drawing strength from his warmth, from the mate bond that pulsed steadily between them. But even as he held her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The audience was held that evening in the great hall. Seren stood at Kyle's side on the dais, wearing a gown of deep blue velvet, her chin held high despite the terror churning in her stomach. Her family stood below, flanked by guards, their faces arranged in masks of wounded innocence. "Your Majesty," her stepmother's voice dripped with false grief, "we thank you for receiving us. We have been so worried about our dear Seren. When she vanished into the storm, we feared the worst." "Did you?" Kale's voice was cold enough to frost the windows. "How touching." "She has always been fragile, Your Majesty, prone to fits of fancy and delusion." Venna dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "We only want to bring her home, where she can receive the care she needs." "The care she needs." Kale repeated the words like they were poison. "You mean the cellar where you made her sleep? The meals you denied her? The labor you forced upon her while your own daughters lived in luxury?" Venna's mask slipped for just a moment, shock flashing across her features. She recovered quickly, but not before Seren saw the fury beneath. "I don't know what lies she's told you, Your Majesty, but I assure you—" "She told me nothing!" Kyle's voice cut like a blade. "She spoke in fever dreams while my healers fought to save her life. The life you nearly ended with your cruelty." "This is outrageous." Seren's father stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "She is my daughter. My property. You have no right to keep her from her family. She is not property. The words came out as a growl, and Seren felt Kale's wolf pressing close to the surface. She is my mate, my future queen, and if you ever speak of her as something to be owned again, I will tear your throat out myself. The hall went deathly silent. Seren's heart pounded in her ears, but beneath the fear, she felt something warm unfurling in her chest. He had claimed her, publicly, called her his mate in front of the entire court, but then a new voice cut through the silence, and the warmth turned to ice. How convenient that you should claim her as your mate, your majesty. Lady Isolde emerged from the shadows, her green eyes glittering with malice. In her hands, she held a sheaf of papers, especially given the rather interesting documents that arrived this morning. A betrothal contract signed by Seren's father, promising her to Lord Vance of the Eastern Mountains. Her smile was sharp as a knife. A contract that was never legally dissolved, which means, according to kingdom law, any claim you make on her is invalid. The blood drained from Seren's face. Lord Vance, the man Kale had killed, the man she had fled from. Lord Vance is dead, Kyle said flatly. Indeed he is, and according to the same laws, his death without the completion of the marriage contract means Seren remains the property of her father's house. Isolde's smile widened. To do with as he sees fit. Seren felt the world crumbling beneath her feet. She looked at Kyle, saw the fury warring with horror in his golden eyes, and knew that even the Alpha King might not be able to save her from the chains of ancient law. And in the watching crowd, her stepmother's smile could have curdled milk. The council convened that night, and Seren was not allowed to attend. She paced her chambers like a caged animal, her wolf howling with distress, the mate bond stretched thin and aching between her and Kyle. He had promised her that he would find a way, that no ancient law would take her from him. But she had seen the looks on the council members' faces, the cold calculations, the political considerations, the weighing of a king's heart against the stability of the realm. She was nothing. She had always been nothing. And now the law agreed. The knock came just after midnight. Seren opened the door expecting Kyle, hoping for news that he had found some loophole, some solution. Instead, she found her stepmother flanked by two fortress guards, their faces blank and professional. The council has reached a decision, Venna said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You are to return with us in the morning. The king has been persuaded to see reason. No. The word came out strangled. No, Kale wouldn't. He promised. The king is bound by the same laws as everyone else, foolish girl. Venna's mask slipped, revealing the cruelty beneath. Did you really think you could escape? Did you really believe a king would choose a worthless little nothing over the stability of his realm? She laughed, cold and sharp. You should have stayed in the snow, Seren. It would have been kinder than what awaits you now. Serene tried to run, tried to push past the guards, but they caught her arms and held her fast. She screamed for Kyle, screamed until her throat went raw, but the only answer was her stepmother's laughter echoing off the stone walls. They locked her in a tower room, comfortable enough, with a bed and a fire, but the door was barred from the outside and the windows were too high to escape. Seren sank to the floor and pressed her hands to her chest, trying to feel the mate bond, trying to reach Kale through the connection that had grown so strong between them. But the bond felt muted, distant, as if something was blocking it. She didn't sleep. She sat by the door and listened to the fortress grow quiet, her mind spinning through possibilities and finding only dead ends. When dawn broke, pale and gray through the narrow windows, she heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and Lady Isolde swept in with a triumphant smile. Good morning, little stray. I trust you slept well. What did you do? Seren's voice was hoarse. What did you tell the council? Only the truth. Isolde examined her nails with false casualness. That the king's judgment has been compromised by his unfortunate attachment to you. That honoring the old laws is essential to maintaining order in the realm. That allowing a king to simply take what he wants, regardless of legal contracts, sets a dangerous precedent. You're lying. Kyle would never agree to let me go. Kyle didn't have a choice. Isolde's smile sharpened. The council voted. 7-3. Even the Alpha King must bow to his council in matters of law. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. He fought for you, I'll give him that. Raged and threatened and nearly shifted in the council chamber. But in the end, the law is the law. And you, sweet Seren, belong to your father. Tears burned in Seren's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. He'll come for me. Will he? By the time he untangles himself from the political mess this has created, you'll be long gone. Your father has already arranged a new match. Lord Vance's brother, I believe. Apparently cruelty runs in the family. Isolde straightened and smoothed her skirts. The carriages leave within the hour. I suggest you make peace with your fate. She swept out, the door slamming shut behind her. Seren heard the bar slide back into place, heard Isolde's footsteps fading down the corridor, and felt the last of her hope crumble to ash. She had let herself believe, let herself hope, let herself love a king who had promised her the world. And now she was going back to the nightmare she had tried to die to escape. Seren pressed her forehead to the cold stone floor and wept. Her wolf keened inside her chest, calling out for its mate, but the bond remained muted and silent. She was alone. She had always been alone. And she had been a fool to think that could ever change. In the courtyard below, the carriages were being prepared. Her stepsister's laughter drifted up through the window, bright and cruel. And somewhere in the fortress, Seren knew Chaol was fighting for her. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She closed her eyes and wondered if the snow would still be deep enough to finish what she had started all those weeks ago. The door exploded inward. Seren scrambled backward, her heart seizing with terror, expecting guards come to drag her to the carriages. Instead, Chaol stood in the shattered doorway, his chest heaving, his golden eyes blazing with a fury that made the air itself tremble. His wolf was so close to the surface that his features had begun to shift, fangs elongating, claws extending from his fingertips. Chaol. His name came out as a sob. They said, Isolde said you couldn't. Isolde lied. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. About everything. The council never voted. The documents she presented were forgeries. She's been working with your stepmother from the beginning. Seren's mind reeled. But the guards, they locked me in here. Guards she bribed. Guards who are currently explaining their choices to my dungeon master. His hands cupped her face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. The rage in his eyes was tempered by something softer, relief and love and a desperate gratitude that made her chest ache. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was in council all night, fighting to find a legal way to protect you. I didn't know she had taken you until an hour ago. How did you find out? Your stepsisters. A grim smile crossed his face. They were bragging to the servants about their triumph. One of those servants is loyal to me. She came to the council chamber and interrupted the session to tell me what was happening. His jaw tightened. I nearly killed Isolde on the spot. Seren clung to him, feeling the mate bond roaring back to life between them. Whatever had been blocking it was gone now, and she could feel his emotions pouring through, fury and fear and love so fierce it stole her breath. The carriages, she gasped. My family is waiting. Let them wait. Chaol's voice dropped to a growl. I have something to say to them. He took her hand and led her through the fortress, his grip warm and steady. Servants pressed against the walls as they passed, their eyes wide with fear. Word had clearly spread that the Alpha King was on a rampage, and no one wanted to be in his path. They emerged into the courtyard to find chaos. Her stepfamily stood surrounded by guards, their faces masks of outrage and fear. Isolde was on her knees in the snow, her wrists bound, her perfect composure shattered into wild-eyed panic. The entire court had gathered to witness whatever was about to happen, nobles and servants alike crowding the balconies and doorways. "Your Majesty," her father stepped forward, his voice trembling with false bravado. "This is an outrage. We had an agreement." "You had nothing." Kyle's voice cracked across the courtyard like a whip. "You had lies and forgeries and the word of a traitor." He released Seren's hand and stalked toward her father with predatory grace. "You sold your own daughter to a monster. You treated her like a slave in her own home. You let your wife and stepdaughters torment her for years." "She's my property." "She is no one's property." The roar made even the guards flinch. Kale's wolf was fully present now, his eyes blazing gold, his power pressing down on everyone in the courtyard like a physical weight. "She is my mate, my chosen queen, and you—" He grabbed her father by the throat and lifted him off his feet. "You are nothing but the worm who will spend the rest of his miserable life in my dungeons, regretting every cruelty you ever inflicted upon her." Her father's face purpled. His feet kicked uselessly at the air. Serene watched with numb satisfaction as the man who had made her childhood a nightmare finally faced consequences for his actions. "And you?" Kyle dropped her father and turned to her stepmother, who shrank back with a whimper. "You will join him, along with your daughters, who I'm told took particular pleasure in tormenting someone who could not fight back." "Please, Your Majesty." Venna fell to her knees. "We didn't know. We never meant—" "You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you will pay for it." He gestured to the guards. "Take them, all of them, including my dear cousin." Isolde screamed as the guards hauled her to her feet. "You can't do this! I am of royal blood! I have rights!" "You had rights." Kyle's voice was ice. "You forfeited them when you conspired to steal my mate, when you forged documents and bribed my guards and tried to destroy the woman I love." He stepped closer, and Isolde went pale. "Be grateful! I am allowing you to live." The guards dragged them away, her father, her stepmother, her stepsisters, and Isolde, all of them screaming and pleading as they disappeared into the fortress. The courtyard fell silent, every eye fixed on the Alpha King and the trembling woman at his side. Kale turned to Seren, the rage drained from his features, replaced by something infinitely tender. "It's over," he said softly. "They will never hurt you again. I swear it on my life." Seren threw herself into his arms and wept with relief. 3 days later, the Alpha King summoned the entire court to the Great Hall. Seren stood in her chambers, staring at the gown laid out on her bed. It was white as fresh snow, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stars. A queen's gown, a bride's gown. When the servants had brought it that morning, she had wept at its beauty, and at the note pinned to its sleeve in Kale's bold handwriting. "For the woman who taught me to feel again. Wear this today, and let me show the world what you mean to me." She dressed with trembling hands, her wolf pacing restlessly inside her chest. The mate bond thrummed with anticipation, and through it she could feel Kale's emotions, nervousness and hope, and a love so vast it took her breath away. Whatever was about to happen, he had been planning it carefully. The great hall was packed when she arrived. Nobles lined the walls in their finest attire. Servants crowded the doorways and balconies, and at the far end of the room, standing before his throne, Kale waited in ceremonial black, a silver crown resting on his dark hair. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything else fell away. Seren walked toward him, the crowd parting before her like water. Whispers followed in her wake, but they were different now, not cruel or mocking, but wondering, admiring. She kept her chin high and her gaze fixed on the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. When she reached the dais, Kale descended the steps to meet her. He took her hands in his, and the warmth of his touch steadied the trembling in her limbs. "Seren Ashwood," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. The use of his surname made her breath catch. "You came to me dying in the snow, convinced you were worth nothing. You had been told your entire life that you were a burden, a mistake, a creature undeserving of love." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she held them back. "I have watched you heal," he continued. "I have watched you find your strength. I have watched you become the woman you were always meant to be, brave and kind and so full of light that you chased away shadows I had lived with for years." His golden eyes shimmered with emotion. "You saved me, Seren. As surely as I pulled you from that snowbank, you pulled me from a darkness I thought would consume me forever." He released her hands and sank to one knee. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The Alpha King, kneeling before a woman who had been a cellar-dwelling servant mere months ago. It was unprecedented. It was unthinkable. And yet here he was, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. "I love you," Kale said, his voice rough with feeling. "I love your courage and your kindness and every scar that proves how strong you are. I love the way you laugh when you think no one is listening. I love the way you look at the world like it still holds wonders worth discovering." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring, a band of white gold set with a diamond that glittered like ice in sunlight. "Will you be my wife, my queen, my mate in all the ways that matter?" Serene's tears spilled over, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Kale, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and rose, pulling her into his arms. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Seren barely heard them. All she knew was the warmth of his embrace, the steady beat of his heart against hers, the mate bond singing with joy between them. "There is one more thing," Kale murmured against her hair. "If you're willing." She pulled back to look at him. "Anything. Let me mark you, here, now, before the entire kingdom." His golden eyes blazed with intensity. "Let there be no doubt in anyone's mind that you are mine and I am yours. Forever." Her heart soared. The marking ceremony, the most intimate bond a wolf could share, done publicly, witnessed by all. It was a statement, a declaration, a promise that could never be broken. "Yes," she whispered. "Mark me." He tilted her head gently, exposing the curve of her neck. His lips brushed her skin, warm and reverent, and she shivered with anticipation. Then she felt the sharp press of his fangs, the brief flare of pain, and the world exploded into gold. The mate bond completed itself in a rush of sensation that stole her breath. She felt him, truly felt him, his love and devotion and fierce protectiveness wrapping around her like armor. His wolf howled in triumph, and her own wolf answered, finally whole, finally home. When Kyle pulled back, his eyes were blazing with satisfaction. He pressed a kiss to the fresh mark on her throat, and the bond pulsed between them, eternal and unbreakable. "Mine," he growled softly. "Yours," she agreed, her voice thick with happy tears. "Always yours." The court erupted into celebration, and the Alpha King kissed his queen as the snow fell softly outside the windows. 1 year later, Seren stood at the window of the queen's chambers, watching the first snow of winter drift down from a pale gray sky. So much had changed since that desperate night when she had run into the forest to die. She pressed her hand to the mark on her throat, feeling the mate bond pulse warm and steady beneath her fingers. Through it, she could sense Kyle in the council chamber below. His focus, his quiet amusement at something one of his advisors had said, and beneath it all, the constant hum of love that connected them across any distance. She was no longer the broken girl who had curled up in a snowbank and prayed for the end. She was Queen Seren Ashwood, beloved of her people, mate to the Alpha King, ruler of the Northern Territories. The scars on her hands had faded, the shadows in her mind had grown quiet, and for the first time in her life she woke each morning actually wanting to face the day. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Kyle entered, still dressed in his council attire, his golden eyes brightening the moment they found her. "The meeting ran long," he said, crossing the room to wrap his arms around her from behind. His chin came to rest on her shoulder, and he pressed a kiss to her mark. "I missed you." "You were gone for 2 hours." An eternity. His hands splayed across her stomach, and she felt him smile against her neck. "How are you feeling?" Serene turned in his arms and looked up at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I'm feeling like I should tell you something." His brow furrowed with concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." She took his hands and pressed them more firmly against her belly. "Everything is perfect, actually. The healer confirmed it this morning." For a moment, Kyle simply stared at her. Then understanding dawned in his golden eyes, and his expression transformed into something so radiant it stole her breath. "A child," he breathed. "We're having a child." "We're having a child," she confirmed, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into an embrace so tight she could barely breathe. She felt his emotions flooding through the bond. Wonder and disbelief, and a happiness so vast it seemed to fill the entire room. "I love you," he said fiercely, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. "I love you and our child, and this life we've built together. I didn't think I would ever have this. I didn't think I deserved it." "Neither did I." She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. "But we were both wrong." He kissed her back with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and when they parted, his forehead rested against hers. "Do you remember what you asked me the night I found you?" he murmured. "You asked me why I bothered saving you." "I remember." "I told you my wolf wouldn't let me leave you." His thumb traced her cheekbone, catching a stray tear. "But that wasn't the whole truth. The truth is that I looked at you lying in that snow, and I saw myself. I saw someone who had given up, someone who had forgotten that life could be beautiful." His voice roughened. "Saving you saved me, Seren. You gave me back my heart." She pulled him close, burying her face in his chest, letting his warmth surround her. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside the fortress of Thornwood Keep, there was only warmth and love, and the promise of a future she had never dared to dream of. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me in the snow." "Thank you for letting me keep you," he whispered back. And as the Alpha King held his queen close, their child growing safely beneath her heart, Seren finally understood what it meant to truly live. The end.